All right, moving on to the secondary lymphoidal organs, the thymus, the tonsils, and the spleen. Now, with the tonsils, I would also include the adenoids. The adenoids also exist in the throat, and I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. What do these tissues do? And also, actually, let's add gut. No, not GAT. Hello. Oh boy, here we are again with my pen this morning. Gut Peyer's patches. What are Peyer's patches? What we're going to call them is gut lymphoid tissues because I've seen the Peyer's patches called a few different things. But they all do, the intent of each of these tissues is to, or at least these tissues here, is to defend the body against pathogens, pathogens being things that are dangerous to us, like a bacteria or a virus, from getting farther into the body. And so the tonsils, the adenoids, Peyer's patches in the gut, and to some degree the spleen, all work to defend us against incoming pathogens. So let's start with the thymus. Now, the thymus isn't really included in that last kind of point of attack list. So the thymus is a tissue located mediasternum, so it's kind of above your heart, okay? It's small, 35 to 40 grams, not, a little bit more than like the size of like a chicken wing. So the thymus, right here, associated with a region close to the heart, is part of general and central immunity. What it does is it makes T cells. We can also call them T lymphocytes. What the T cells do is they defend our body against things that we have been infected with before when the B cells interact with them. We'll get to that later. And the T cells also can I think of them as kind of the assassins of the immune system. Once they're trained up, once they know what to look for, they go and kill it. And so, for example, if we have an immunization, right now COVID-19 is all over the place, right? Well, we think it is. COVID-19 is a virus that can enter our bodies through the respiratory system. Oh my goodness, here's that yawn again. It's not even that early. And T cells, if you've had an immunization, have been trained to identify the COVID-19 virus. It's almost like putting a sticky note on the COVID-19 virus so that T cells are like, ooh, I recognize that. And they attack the virus, and they don't kill it because you can't kill a virus because the virus hasn't ever been alive. Viruses are living things, but they destroy it. So another thing that T cells do is they make something called, or the thymus, it makes something called thymosin. And what the thymosin does is it takes immature T lymphocytes and helps them mature more quickly. So basically what's happening here in the thymus when we're young is that the thymus is kicking out T lymphocytes, T cells, making lots and lots of them, having them develop very, very quickly. And that helps keep us healthy when we're young. Young people have a usually very strong, very healthy immune response when they're exposed to something. As we age, and when I mean age, I mean like when we hit our 60s, 70s, and 80s, the thymus becomes kind of, let's just say, old. And what happens to the thymus is the thymus downregulates and it doesn't become smaller, but it becomes replaced with fatty tissue, all right? And this process is called involution. And so instead of being a gland that is producing lots and lots of T cells and producing hormones that make those T cells mature more quickly, the thymus just kind of goes downhill. And as a consequence, our immunity also goes kind of downhill. We still have an immune memory. Our body still remembers many of the pathogens we've experienced, but we don't have very many T cells, or not as many as we did, let's say, when you're 80 as when you were 8. Now let's talk about these point of contact lymphoid tissues, the tonsils, and I would also include in this case the adenoids. I'll show you a picture of that in a little bit. The tonsils themselves come in 3 groups: the palatine tonsils, the pharyngeal tonsils, and the lingual tonsils. And these tonsils are the palatine tonsils are also called the adenoids, okay? So that's when you hear about the pharyngeal. When you hear about an adenoidectomy or a tonsillectomy, what happens is doctors go in and they remove these tissues because they do tend to get infected and respond to things that come in through your respiratory and your oral cavity. So if you think about it, we're always putting things in our mouth. We breathe through our mouth and we breathe through our nose. So there's a lot of exposure to the external environment through the nasal and oral cavities. See, I'm yawning. I say oral cavity. I say, oh my goodness, this yawning thing I have. The other thing that happens is there are a lot of pathogens that come in, believe it or not, through your tear ducts. When you rub your eyes, that's one of the main ways people catch a cold. You've touched a surface that has the rhinovirus on it. You rub your eyes because let's say, there's pollen around and your eyes are itching, you're having allergies. You rub your eyes, that delivers the virus to your tear ducts. The virus travels down your tear ducts and hits the adenoids, the pharyngeal tonsils first. So it goes way up there in the pharynx, the nasal pharynx. What ends up happening is when we're young, as these lymphoid tissues are constantly being exposed, they can become enlarged and be kind of overreactive. These tissues are, working to keep infection out, but if they're always keeping infection out, if they swell, they can actually impair breathing. And so children, sometimes little children, will snore very, very loudly. So doctors will go in, or asthmatics as well, they'll have trouble breathing because these tissues swell severely. And so what doctors will do is go in and remove the tonsils so that airflow is restored and it's easier for the individual to breathe. What does that mean though? You do have a little bit of a lower immunity to things from the external environment. And so here's an example of the lingual tonsil way in the back of the tongue here. These ones usually are not removed. It's the palatine and the pharyngeal tonsil, which are the adenoids, which are usually removed. And when you see somebody who has, let's say, tonsillitis, these tissues are huge. They're very, very swollen. And that's why doctors look in our mouth to see if those tissues are swollen. Now let's talk about the spleen. This is the biggest lymphoid organ in the body. It is in the upper left quadrant of the abdomen. It can be injured in car accidents very frequently because it's a long organ as well. A splenectomy is a surgical procedure in which the spleen is removed, and a lot of times in a car accident, because we travel very quickly, I mean, even 55 miles an hour, I know when we drive here in the Central Valley on the freeway, there it is again, 55 miles an hour doesn't seem that fast, but when you stop from 55 miles an hour, if you've taken physics, you know that things don't start and stop at the same time, different items, especially in the body. So the car stops, but your body keeps moving. The items in your body keep moving even as the exterior of your body stops. And so the spleen can be jerked forward and it can actually become lacerated as a consequence of a car accident. So oftentimes, because the spleen is full of blood, doctors will have to remove the spleen to stop bleeding. What happens in the spleen? Lots of bacterial phagocytosis, lots of removal of old red blood cells. So the spleen is kind of an area in the body where we see a lot of destruction of yucky stuff. All right. The liver is a filter and a chemical detoxification region. The spleen takes apart old destroyed red blood cells, white blood cells, bacteria, viruses. The spleen also acts as what we call a blood reservoir. It's full of blood because that's how pathogens sometimes travel through the body. So when somebody is really sick, let's say, or there's sometimes there are infections, parasitic infections that infect the spleen. The enlargement of the spleen is usually an indication that the individual has a severe infection. It can also be sepsis. It can also indicate sepsis in an individual. Okay, we're going to start on the immune system. Now, the immune system, really interesting topic. This is going to take this end of this lecture and then one more lecture to maybe even 2 to get through. When I say lectures, it's these short 15-minute snippets that Screencast is only allowing me to produce right now, so my apologies. So the immune system is intended to protect us against invading pathogens. Pathogens can include bacteria, viruses, foreign tissue that may get under your skin by mistake, and cancer, believe it or not. Our bodies defend us against our own cancer cells. It is made up of specialized cells, so the T cells, the B cells, our lymphocytes, and specialized molecules. Now, there are different types of immunity. There's non-specific immunity that are just simple barriers, like our skin. It's a mechanical barrier. It keeps us safe from other harmful things. Mucus would be a non-specific immune function. Tears, they help track bacteria, they help wash them away. Inflammation, which we hear a lot about, inflammation's bad, and it can be bad, right? The purpose of inflammation is to attract immune cells, our lymphocytes, to where an injury or an infection is happening. It increases blood flow to a region. It increases vascular permeability. So remember when we talked about the blood vessels, capillaries? Well, inflammation actually makes capillaries more leaky. It promotes more blood flow to a region to allow white blood cells to escape the capillary beds. That process is called extravasation. And so those white blood cells, because the blood vessels, the capillaries are more permeable, they can actually rush to the region and help get rid of whatever's in there, okay? That inflammation promotes the movement of white blood cells to the site of injury or infection. And so because that happens, inflammation can actually be a very healthy thing. You want healthy inflammation to help promote healing. It's when inflammation gets out of control that we have a problem. So here is a basic flow chart showing the inflammatory response. So let's say what happens is a bacteria enters in through a tissue. You get a cut, bacteria gets in there. Tissue damage occurs when you get a cut, right? When that happens, mediators, right? They're saying mediators here. Mediators meaning chemical mediators that our body makes. Okay, chemicals are released. That increases blood flow to the site. It attracts white blood cells. It increases vascular permeability to allow these white blood cells to escape into the area where the tissue damage had occurred, all right? It increases the number of leukocytes, all right, white blood cells, and chemical mediators to the damaged tissue. The bacteria then become contained, right? So basically you get all these white blood cells, you bring the army in. The bacteria, the invaders, are trapped and they become destroyed, and many of these white blood cells phagocytize them. Hopefully what happens is no bacteria remain, the tissue get repaired, and you might have a little scar, but you're okay. If the bacteria remain, all right, that's a bad thing. That means that your immune system has to work harder. The immune system will make additional chemical mediators, right? Remember, these mediators are all chemicals made by our body. And that's going to start the whole process again until hopefully the infection is gone. All right, we'll start specific immunity in the next little segment because this takes some time. I will start with the basic description here, but we'll go into the details in the next segment. Specific immunity is where our body is trained to recognize and respond to something that's bad for us, like bacteria, okay? Viruses, sometimes even toxins. We call this either inherited or inborn immunity. Inborn immunity because some of our immunity we get from our mothers before we're born or shortly after we're born through nursing. So this is an inherited way of getting immune information against certain diseases since we were little tiny babies from birth. All right, we'll start again in a few minutes. On the next video.